Well, good evening and welcome, everyone. My name is Ben. Richard and I will be your hosts this evening, and Lynn is our producer, editor, and technician, and Jen is assisting tonight as well. I should mention that after tonight, we will be having one more HSO Speaker Series presentation to finish off this year's program. We will be joined on November 24th by journalist, professor, and fellow HSO member Randy Boswell, who will explore the ongoing controversy over our commemorative landscape and investigate whether there are constructive healing ways forward. The statues and place names that are all around us, are there those more deserving of recognition? We have rarely seen a topic that has spiked such passionate reaction on all sides, so it should be a very interesting evening. So that's Upheaval Across Canada's Landscape of Commemoration with guest speaker Randy Boswell on Wednesday, November 24th at 7 p.m. All presentations get posted on our website and Facebook page, so if you happen to miss any, you can sit back and enjoy the presentation later at your leisure. All of our presentations are also followed by a question and answer session. Because we're on Zoom, we ask that you use text box to type your questions throughout the evening. After the presentation, Richard will pepper our guest speakers with any questions you have. We ask that all audience members remain on mute throughout the evening as a courtesy to our presenters. Type your questions and comments to us and we will strive to bring all of them forward on your behalf. We would also like to take the time, with Remembrance Day just a few hours away, to acknowledge the many brave men and women throughout our history who have made such great sacrifices. Tying in with tonight's presentation, the valor of the Algonquin and all Indigenous people should be recognized. The Algonquin fought courageously at the side of the British during the American Revolution and the War of 1812, and alongside Canadians during all of our major conflicts. It should be acknowledged that Indigenous people have not always been justly recognized or rewarded for their immense bravery and sacrifice. And now let me talk about this evening's presentation. We are the Historical Society of Ottawa, and we've been telling our city and area's great stories for over 123 years, through presentations such as our speaker series, through our publications, and now through our popular website and Facebook page as well. However, when we look back at our century plus of sharing our area's history, too often it has been of too narrow a perspective and too often focused only on the most recent 200 years since Europeans first settled here. We welcome opportunity as tonight presents to explore the vast past that took place before the relatively recent arrival of folks such as Philemon Wright and Colonel By, and for all of us to more fully appreciate the important history and heritage of the people upon whose unceded land we enjoy our lives today. Dr. Peter Stockdale is committed to exploring this history, and specifically to bringing back to life the Indigenous trails of the Ottawa Valley. Peter is dedicated to fostering awareness of the communities that have lived and traveled along these ancient pathways for millennia, and the lands and waters that are the traditional home and territory of these peoples. For centuries now, we've built on top of these traditional lands, roads, farms, subdivisions, parking lots, shopping malls, office towers, and more. So how do we now go back in time to trace where the valley's ancient inhabitants tread? Peter is striving to unlock some of these mysteries. We'll share his theories and discuss the evidence that is bringing him to his conclusions. Introducing Peter, we are honored to be joined by Barb Sarrazin and Merv Sarrazin, council members of the Algonquins of Pikwakanagan First Nation. We will hear the story of a fascinating initiative that has been taking place where youth are learning the traditional craft of canoe building while also being taught the Algonquin language at the same time. Barb Sarrazin has served for many years in social service and child welfare and holds a social worker degree. But Barb is most proud of her role as a mother and grandmother in her Pikwakanagan community. She's lovingly known and respected as a sister, auntie, mom, grandmother to many. Barb is also very young. I know this because she was born the same year I was. Merv Sarrazin, Barb's brother-in-law and a fellow councillor, is a proud descendant of Chief Pinessi and has served in senior management in the First Nations communities for over 30 years. Merv is a traditional person, hunter, fisher, trapper, and gatherer, and Merv looks forward to offering his own additional insight during Peter's presentation tonight. Merv's commitment to cultural vibrancy and the mentoring of others and leadership has allowed Merv to establish and cultivate relationships and partnerships within and beyond his community. Tonight, Merv will be sharing some amazing photographs with us, and through these pictures, we'll tell stories to help us better understand his heritage. Barb and Merv, you've got 15 minutes to tell us some great stories. If that's not enough, we'll have to have you back next year and we'll give you a whole evening to yourselves. So without further ado, I will turn the first portion of the evening over to councillors Sarazan, starting by generously welcoming us to their unceded land. Barb?
Oh, Skudashake Owapside Kladis Nakas, Algonquin Teji Pikwakanagan, Makwedno Dodam. My name is Barbara Stairs and I'm with the Algonquins of Pikwakanagan, and I am part of the Bear Clan. I'd like to welcome you all to our unceded territory of the Algonquins. We're very proud of our territory and we're in current negotiations for our land claim. And I give strength and I ask the Creator to come and join us so that we can have a good evening of not only storytelling, but learning of each other and from each other. I say Chimigwech. I was asked here tonight to come and share some of our history, culture, our connection to the land. I was more than willing to do that, but there was something more deeper that I felt was more important, was to ask my brother-in-law Mervyn, for he and my husband Gary are so connected to the land that they know trails, they know this land more than anyone I've ever come across, other than my father-in-law, Mervyn's father, Daniel Sarazan. I was a young girl when I met Daniel, and he told me some of the hunting that went on here and what type of hunting that they went on, and some of the stories that he told way back in the day. So I met him back in '79, and what I was really most proud of and hearing was how he did canoe building. And I didn't understand the concept of what canoe building really took place. I had no idea. I just know that they had to go gathering the materials in the Algonquin Park and anywhere else that they could get their hands on, the cedar trees, the spruce roots, and I didn't even know what pitch meant other than it was gum that they boiled and they put that gum on the canoe to make it waterproof. I had no idea what any of that meant, and through time and within time, living here with the Algonquins of Pikwakanagan, my brother-in-law Barry, one of the younger brothers of my husband and Mervyn, he learned his language, the Algonquin language, very ancient language, very hard to grasp as well. And he learned it, and he was born to that. And to this day, he has picked up the building of that birch bark, and he helped his daughter just recently. His daughter's only 14. And she asked him if she could learn how to do a canoe. How do I build one? And he said, you have to work hard. You have to start it, you have to finish it, and you also have to gather up the materials. And you're going to learn it in the Algonquin language. And she did. She did that. And they continue to do that. And we also have other nieces that came forward. And Barry, he teaches them. He teaches them how to build a canoe from start to finish, including speaking to the spirit of the trees and the medicines that they go and they sit there and they talk to the spirit of the trees. They speak to them and let the trees know with respect in the Algonquin language what they're going to be using those materials for. And then they replenish, not only by prayer, but by putting seeds back down into the ground so that future generations still yet to be can also continue on. And that's what Daniel taught us. And that's what he taught me. And I'm very proud of that. I'm very proud of that moment in time when I learned of how he kept the canoe building going. And it was only within time, 43 years now with my husband Gary, that I learned more and more about the Algonquin culture that goes on here and thrives here in Pikwakanagan. Even the name Pikwakanagan, the Algonquins of Pikwakanagan. That is a vast history and knowledge and such deep in culture and so connected to the earth, so connected to the land. So I asked my brother-in-law, Mervyn, because I heard him speak many times and he has so many stories. And I'm going to introduce my brother-in-law, Mervyn. He and I sit on council today with the Algonquins of Pikwakanagan, and we're deep into politics, and we're doing our best and putting our thoughts forward, and not only living in our past and bringing forward to our future, but we always work towards the betterment of our community, ourselves, and taking our place within our Algonquin nation. So without any further, I'm going to ask Mervyn Sarrazin, my brother-in-law, to come forward. Jamie Woods.
So I just noticed I was on mute and my lips were moving and nobody was hearing me. So my apologies. So I unmuted myself. So anyways, here's Barb's just laughing at me here because my lips were flapping over here and nobody's able to hear what I'm still saying. But I did thank her for quite the introductory and the sharing of her experience being and marrying into her family some 40 some years ago. Actually, she didn't speak about that. I stood in their wedding as their best man. But so we're quite connected in terms of family. And so, but in mentioning my background, I've been working with the First Nation for well over 32 years on as the band manager, office manager, executive director, you call it what you want. But I've been involved with the administration for that long, and only more recently, the last year and a half, as a member of the council. So I'm able to use my administrative skills in the job I'm doing now in terms of helping further a lot of the portfolios. And one of the portfolios that Barb and I sit on is culture and language, and archaeology was part of it, but I thought it required a standalone portfolio, so I pulled archaeology from culture and language, and I'll speak about why I did it, why I pushed for that so hard, and the results we were able to get from it. I did speak a little bit about it actually in a pre-introductory, but and so I grew up in a very traditional family. So if you want to maybe go to the pictures, I could maybe tell that story best. And in this first series of photos, it's a story about my upbringing. This is my family on my father's side. The gentleman you see on the top right-hand side is my father, Lamab Sarrazin, and he was born in 1864. And he had three boys, I'm told. One is my father, Daniel Sarrazin, who you see, likely the guy that's sitting on the fence back there. It could be him, we don't know, or whether that's one of his brothers, Tommy Sarrazin Sr., or the one that passed away early in life was Michael Sarrazin. But my father, Daniel, is the chief over here on the far left. So you see he's got his traditional regalia on, and he wore it when he was chief for about 10 years in the 1950s. But he was also a builder of birch bark canoes, which you see my grandfather in the other picture I just showed you. He built that canoe in behind them around 1920. And so he's got a leather or deer hide tanning in his hands there, and I'm told he would use that for many purposes. Either he'd cut strapping off it for seating for the canoe, or he'd use it for clothing or whatnot. But over here, my father, Daniel C. Sarrazin, was born in 1901. And he married my mother, who's in the middle there, in the middle picture. They married in about 1945. So my dad already had a family before he met my mother in the 1940s, and he had 8 children of his own in his first family, and his first wife passed away, so he had 8 children. At the time he met my mother, she had 4 children, so they're bigger than the Brady Bunch, so they had 12 children, right? Automatic. But then after marriage, they had 11 more. This is where yours truly comes in the middle of the 11. So there's 23 in total that I'm aware of, right? So I'm in the middle, and my brother Bull, who's I'm at his house here in Barbara's. He's a year older than I am, so we're that close. We've always been close knit family. But down below is a picture of my father in about 1970. Yeah, he has a canoe over his head. Those canoes that he built, and he built about 80 in his lifetime. And that's a 14-foot canoe, Algonquin canoe. It's an Algonquin hunting canoe. And he built about 80 of those. And he's about my age there. He's about 60 something, right? So he's left this ancient art with us. So you see, my grandfather built them. He built them. I'm twiddling with them. I'll say it's kind of like my bucket list. I used to help him when I was younger, but I built 2 models so far to scale. And but there is a nephew in Pikwakanagan here, Crockett, who's the master builder, and he builds them identical to that style. Over here is I put together the 4 generations. So in the back ground, you see my grandfather, Lamab, my father, Daniel, then there's yours truly, Merv, and my son, Matthew. So pretty good collage of 4 generations. And then right below that is my brother, Barry. He's 2 years younger than I am. So, but he and we hunt together quite a bit too. So we went on an expedition to hunt in Algonquin territory in northern eastern Quebec over in Temiskaming, near Chippewa Reserve. So we were over there hunting, and we ended up we got a moose on that trip. So I wanted to share that part of it as a hunter. And then on the far right on the lower level, that's myself at one of our powwows in Pikwakanagan, and as a traditional dancer. I sing on a drum as well, but out here I was just dancing. Somebody got a photo of me, so I would share that because we carry on our traditions here quite well. So that's basically the history, showing some photos of my family on my father's side. So, but there's more to the story there because my grandfather had a trap line in the central core of what they call today Algonquin Park. And the trap line then, before Algonquin Park was Algonquin Park, before we were dispossessed from it, his trap line was about 3 times the size of what the provincial standard trap lines are now. I did share that story with Peter Stockdale and Max, and I forget the other gentleman, but that's another story for another time on our way of life and how things were before the government started to make changes. But what I wanted to focus on more on this presentation in the last few minutes I have is our connection to Chief Panesse. So this leads me to the next series of photos. I learned a lot more about my father on my father's side over time, but more recently the discovery of our linkage to Chief Panesse is something I've been working on with Chief Wendy Jocko, who shared her family story, which basically is my same story. We're second cousins. So you see in this photo is, starting with me, and my mother, her name is Bernadette. She's that lovely lady there, Bernadette Lavallee Sarrazin. So she's a Lavallee. And so this is her father. There's 2 photos of her father. So I'll take the far left. He was in the war, World War I, when this photo was taken, and it was a photo that Chief Wendy Jocko provided. She wrote under there Uncle Matt Lavallee, because Chief Wendy's grandmother is my grandfather's brothers, so they're brothers and sisters. You see that there's connectivity there. And so, but the photo in the middle is my grandfather going forward from 1914 to 1918 up to about 1980 something. So he was in his, he was already like 80 some years old, maybe 90 years old in that picture. I don't know for sure, but I remembered him. My mother used to go and get him in Ottawa because Veterans Affairs used to look after him in Ottawa. So she'd bring him home to Pikwakanagan in those days. But the lady that's down below on the lower right-hand side is his wife, is my grandmother. Her name is Dolly Commanda. So see, this is the connection in terms of our lineage linkages to Chief Benesse. And at a face-to-face meeting with Peter Stockdale and Max Finkel and the other gentlemen, Wendy shared a family tree that shows the direct lineage to Chief Benesse. So I'm a 7th generation descendant of Chief Benesse, and so is Wendy. And so we shared that in hopes of building the story, and hopefully having a statue erected somewhere in Peter's project somewhere of Chief Benesse. So I wanted to share that a little bit for now, and I think my time's probably up by now. Miigwech.
Thank you.
Miigwech, Barb, Miigwech, Verve, and Barb, if you could present your introduction.
Sure. Thank you.
I think Barb will have to unmute herself.
I pulled a Merv just now.
We all do.
I thanked him over here. So anyway, thank you, Merv, for that history. It was wonderful to hear. Right now, I'd like to welcome Peter Stockdale, introduce you to Peter Stockdale, who is a researcher and analysis, including on Indigenous matters. Peter has also been active in developing peace and nature paths, parks, and places in the Ottawa for nearly 20 years. Peter is one of the founding members of Free the Falls, which is dedicated to fostering Grandfather Williams Commanda's vision to protect the 7,000-year-old Akikodishwan, the Chartier Falls, the sacred site, and reconciliation with the Algonquin and Anishinaabe. Tonight, Peter will share with us his current work to bring back to life the Indigenous trails of the Ottawa Valley. So, Peter?
Thank you, Barb. So this is how it started. You'll see this building. It's from 1828. It's on 40 Furler Avenue in Ottawa. And I came upon it by accident through COVID walks. And outside this house was one of its members of its family, John Morrison, and they'd been there for 100 years. And I asked, did you know of an Indigenous trail nearby? And to my surprise, he said, oh, Sherwood Avenue is one. So off I trundled to go onto Sherwood Avenue behind that house and started trying to figure it out. Where did it go? It went straight to Remick Rapids near the Champlain Bridge. Where did it come from? It seemed to come from Dow's Lake. What would that be the original? Was there any other evidence? Now, I know this is the historical group of historians and folks of that bent, but so the standards of evidence are weak using that method, because there's the maps don't tell you that there was a Sherwood Avenue until relatively late. There is no written corroboration that this ever happened. learn more about this trail from one person saying that yes, there was a trail there, and you learn about it by looking at maps and trying to make sense of what works, what happened. And in some cases of these trails, you get better evidence than that. Now, so this started, and I started talking to the historian Dave Alston, the Kichi Sibi historian. He went on newspapers.com and he found another half a dozen trails that way. And I found another 15 through Google, and I was talking with Max Finkelstein, the master canoeer, and Jim Stone, and a number and more folks as to, was this interesting? Was there anything happening? Where were these trails really, etc. And it essentially snowballed from there. And next slide. Thank you. And so this is what Jim Stone has done. This doesn't give you the Ottawa, Eastern Ontario side of things, but it gives you the West Quebec and a bit of Ontario up to North Bay. But it gives you, it's a vast territory, and we are also going deeper into Eastern Ontario as well. So I'd like to, at this point, take a break. So next slide, please. So are there any questions at this point in the proceedings? Of course, I'm having audio difficulties, so I'm going to get rid of this for a moment.
So far, we have no questions, but I certainly encourage everyone to ask. Don't be shy.
Okay.
I'd say it doesn't look like anyone's asking anything now. So if you want to continue now, and I'll.
Sure. Next slide.
Okay.
Thank you. All right. So there are a variety of different kinds of trails. I understand Indigenous people don't make as much of a distinction between water trails and land trails, but we see, definitely trails which are used for portaging canoes, and others which have other functions. What you see in front of you is the one that we've been focusing on, which is the Chief Benesi Trail at Rockcliffe, and on the right-hand side. Okay, and so would you like me to address that one, Jen, or are you going to deal with that later, Richard? I just saw a chat.
If you'd like to address it now, yeah. Is it usual that very old roads may have been started as trails?
Yes, I mean, and you see that today, you can see that best in the countryside. So elsewhere, the grid system has, and concession roads have overlain a lot of earlier trails, but certainly you can see instances today, like obviously Wellington-Richmond Road is the one that everybody will know who's been in Ottawa, where yes, that was an Indigenous trail. Now it's covered with asphalt. So yes, to get back to the images there that you see on the right with everybody climbing up that road, up that stone steps that's going up to the Governor General's. And that one is a bit of an enigma. And we thought, oh, this is definitely the trail. And then it seemed to be less likely to be the case. But we still have to work that one out. How many trails that were used by, okay. Richard, how do you want me to deal with that? Okay, I can deal with Michael's now, I guess. How many trails that were used by early humans were trails that were created by animals on their journeys? Well, indeed, I mean, long before humans were tramping over here, certainly there were hunting trails. And I would say that probably, many began as hunting trails, but on the other hand, if you're carrying, for example, a canoe, you don't necessarily want to follow a hunting trail. So yes, in some cases they would be hunting trails, in other cases, no. And likewise, some were used for ritual, well, for other purposes, which we will get into shortly. And again, would they be first started by animals? In some cases, yes, and in some cases, not. Definitely not. Okay, next slide, please. All right, well, here is the previously described Richmond Landing below Parliament Hill, opposite Victoria Island, where the Naval Monument is, and you can get into the Aqua taxi and find your way from the bottom of Parliament Hill there. And this is mostly known as a place where settlers headed in the direction of Richmond, Ontario. But before that, it was a trail, up along Wellington and going to Richmond Road, and then curving, for reasons which don't quite make sense to me yet, down to Richmond, Ontario, to the Jock River. Now that part makes sense. Next slide, please. All right. Now, in the literature, there are descriptions of warpaths, and I have not found evidence of warpaths directly yet. But the best candidate is the one in the middle of that, which parallels the 416 between Ottawa and the left of Cornwall. That's right. That's where the cursor is. Exactly. Between Iroquois on the St. Lawrence and up to near up to the Rideau, near Cummings Island, near Herdman as well. And the one on the left, on the right between Ottawa and Montreal may also be a warpath, but we don't have enough, and I'm not quite sure whether it would qualify. But anyway, that is one. What is more obvious are paths of avoidance. So next slide, please. So here's one of them, and this is actually written about by Edwin Souter in the late 1800s to avoid attack by the Mohawks between Lac Limy near the casino, essentially up the back along Chemin de la Montagne, Lake Mountains, which is up you see there, and then down Breckenridge Creek, which is what you can see on the right of your screen. Why is that green? I don't know, by the way. But in any case, that brings you to the Ottawa, and there are a whole number of portages where you can see that there is what appears to be fear of Mohawks in around Ottawa, presumably in the last 400 years from the 1660s, when there was an attempt to exterminate all of the Algonquins in that there especially, well, there also, excuse me. And so trying to understand that, what was the purpose? Was it to avoid attack? Was it for hunting? What else was going on at the time? This particular one, this portage of avoidance, would have been also one of the first areas that would have been exposed after the Champlain Sea would have started to drop at 11,000. Anyway, I will move to the next slide, please. And so what you see on the left-hand side is a view from Parliament Hill, which, as Murph was saying, yeah, probably it was used for other things, and it would have been an important site for reasons I will talk about a bit more. But this is on in the winter solstice, and this was used, as far as I understand, also for solstice and probably equinox viewing as well. And you can see the way the light is coming down that channel. Now, on the right-hand side, that is a gathering rock, and there is a gathering rock for men and a gathering rock for women for educational purposes. So there are various different kinds of purposes, and you needed essentially in some trails to get you there. So that is yet another kind of trail. So can we move to the next slide, please? And of course, they tended to get a combination. So the trail that we mentioned, the outset along Sherwood Drive between Dow's Lake and Rabbit Rapids, well, that brings you to the stromatolites near the Champlain Bridge. And it seems to me that that was possibly used for harpooning, spearfishing, judging from the lack of rocks that are there. And what we also see, or I see, and there has not been archaeological work on this as far as I understand, but for me, for all the world, especially this summer when the water was so low, that looked like a very long stone-made snake, which you can find in some other areas, including in Ohio. Exactly. Thank you for pointing out that snake, Jen. So if we go to the next slide. So I'd like you to imagine that you're sitting in your bath and you've only got your head exposed. And that head of yours is actually the Gatineau Hills. And that is what everything looked like, if you like, around 11,000, 13,000 years ago. There wasn't a whole lot there. There was a gigantic sea. And the only thing that was really exposed was the the Gatineau Hills. Well, the water started to drop down, and it started to expose, let's say, your knees. So one knee might be Kanata, and the other knee might be Parliament Hill. So whatever was starting to emerge at that time became important, not just because you could sit on it, but you could also do rituals, you could hunt and the like. And then about every 1,000 years, the water dropped down considerably. So you start getting plateaus, and there were huge outfalls of water and the like. So imagine that your shoulders were exposed at that point, and you get a kind of shelf of land at that point. And therefore you want to have trails that are going along that shelf of your shoulder, and so on, as the water drops to about 7,000 years ago, and the water doesn't seem to have changed a whole lot since then, with the exception of dams like the Carillon Dam, the Chaudière Dam, and a lot of the other dams further upriver. But I think I'm having you consider the Champlain Sea, in the Ottawa Gatineau area, in case you were thinking further afield. But so there are different kinds of trails to be considered. Were people going along doing deep land walks, or were they taking great routes through water? And there are different kinds of trails and portages at different times, which take different routes. Now, we've got in the European mind that you know, there is a road, and that road will look the same in the summer and the spring and the winter. Well, that wasn't the case. You get some of that idea still in the Canadian mind, because okay, people might use winter roads, you know, over swamps or rivers, frozen rivers and the like. But mostly we think, you know, Richmond Road is going to look like Richmond Road every time of the year. But there were summer portages, spring portages, etc. And so these things change, and you have to realize that. And of course, different places and the trails to get to them were used for different purposes. So there was the negotiation element, there was the war, which I mentioned earlier, trade, hunting, you know, and gathering, certainly looking for specific medicines, you know, having trails to look out upriver and downriver, as Merv had talked about, visiting family, you know, creating marriages, powwow, etc. So there are a whole lot of different things that it wasn't just about canoes and portages, and so that needs to be understood. Next slide, please. You know, looks like I've repeated myself. What happened there? Oh no, this will be question break, right? Oh, there. Okay.
I have two questions for you here, Peter.
Please go ahead.
One is, as Indigenous tradition is an oral one, have we compiled any information on trails from various Indigenous groups in Ontario to the same degree that appears we have for Western Quebec? So do we have as much information? For
not yet. I mean, certainly, well, our focus has been, relatively speaking, fairly narrow, but within the confines that we've come to so far, anyway, and I'm not saying that we have done this exhaustively yet, we've noticed on this part of Ontario, particularly, there doesn't seem to be as much story left as far as human story. I mean, one of the things that we see, you know, when we're attempting to make a trail, how can we make this memorable? How can this trail walk be meaningful? Is what is there to talk about? And if you walk about Ottawa, you'll see plaques, and may mention there were a few Indigenous people. Maybe they were Algonquin, maybe they weren't. And that's it. And then they will talk about the farm or the factory or the great house or whatever it is. But there's a huge amount of data around there, and there isn't so much data either about that place or even the detailed history that, you know, we can see. And I think what we saw at the beginning of the presentation gives you some sense of that, because you have a very good description of personal histories and family histories, but it's less connected to pieces of land. It's at least in Ottawa-Gatineau, as far as we've seen so far. Next question.
Yeah, we got a couple more that have come in.
Okay.
Was the Rockcliffe Pimisi portage used to get to the Rideau River and summer camps at Merrickville? Do you know anything about the Rockcliffe Pimisi portage?
I would think so. I mean, it went as far as the Gulf of Mexico, right? So it would be this would be the route for Gulf of Mexico, Ohio, Indiana, and the St. Lawrence. And if you're trying to get to Merrickville, I would say that would be the case. If you're coming from, it depends where you're coming from. If you're coming from northern Quebec, from the James Bay, if you're coming from Montreal or the Atlantic, that would be the route. But there's another route if you're coming from the west through Dow's Lake at the near the railway line that comes down to Bayview and La Roche Park. So that
Someone else asking about the special gathering rock. What clues are there today that a rock would be a special gathering rock?
well, in this case, that is Indigenous knowledge from members of Pikwakanagan. That's how we know that
Yeah,
specifically.
so oral tradition.
That's definitely oral tradition. Yes.
How wide were the trails?
Well, in that static slide that you see, you saw at the very beginning, I don't know if you remember that, at Pinecrest Cemetery, that gives you a sense of it. It's about a meter or so wide, and you can kind of, that interesting that it was another hint that the stone steps were probably also used as portage because of the width. But if we go even higher in the presentation, where we had the very height, yeah, the old Indian trail between Black Rapids, yeah.
And so do we know how far people traveled? I guess people are asking, are these local trails that were just used for getting from place to place, or did people use them for traveling for thousands of km?
As far as we can see, it would appear thousands of kilometers. The idea of distance, of what is a pleasant walking distance, was extremely far, and so the idea of traveling to the Gulf of Mexico is not outlandish, and we hear that from the canoe makers, for example. We don't find as many artifacts from the Atlantic or from the Gulf of Mexico, as far as I can tell, as I've seen so far. We see very regularly from James Bay, from Mistassini, from Ohio and Indiana, Lake Superior for its copper, but less from the Atlantic, which is a bit strange. And yeah, even up to Labrador, the northern tip of Labrador. So
a lot like the highways today, I guess, where, like the Queensway, where it's part of the Trans-Canada Highway, but then also a lot of people just use it locally for getting around Ottawa.
yes, I mean, certainly if you're going to be getting food, you need to be able to hunt and gather and do that thing. And I believe, and this is speculation on my part, but that there was preparation for some of these longer term portaging between the east and the west, particularly because there seemed to be a jump off point because Chaudière, Akikojuan was the most formidable of the portages between here and the other side of the Great Lakes. So I have a belief that the large Quercus macrocarpa, which is sweet acorn, which was between Chaudière and Deschênes in large amounts, and the butternuts that seem to have grown on the opposite shore, that perhaps that they were collected for much longer distance travel east-west. But again, this is speculation.
Okay, just a couple more questions here because they're still coming in. Can you mention something about the portage from Black Rapids on the Rideau to the Ottawa River near the foot of Woodruff Avenue?
That one, we have fairly good evidence in that image there with the trail, which gives you an idea about what is the width of a portage look like, of a canoe trail look like. There is some written evidence and a description that it goes down along Britannia Road, and there seem to be, depending on the map that you see, some of it goes to the west and some of it goes to the east towards Mud Lake. So, but Britannia Road is generally seen as one route, and then you can see when you go to the cemetery, you can discern at the southeastern end a route or possibly two of a trail towards Black Rapids, but in between the cemetery and Black Rapids, there may be a hint or two how to get to Black Rapids, but there's a, as happens with many of these urban trails, settlers have built their houses and their other roads on top of them, and so you might get a remnant line of a couple of trees along a road, or a road that doesn't make a whole lot of sense, or a path inside a park, or there are hints that you can get, but not too much more.
Okay, and one last question here for now. Someone's asking about, were the trails maintained, or did travelers pretty much have to clear?
Well, I think probably the best evidence of that I have heard of in this area is at Deschênes on the Quebec side, near Guillaume Park. And Henry Robertson of the Ottawa Field Naturalists has worked with Rick Henderson and others, and he talks about areas where there has been regular burning in order to clear out the bush to maintain the trail. So certainly there's been a huge tradition of burning to maintain and cultivate the forests, which we have lost until starting to think about it quite recently, in favor of logging and conservation. But yes, there definitely has been, and there was, and another thing that you find is the bending of trees. Trees were bent all over Turtle Island in order to, and rocks were used likewise to indicate trails. And work was done in order to achieve that, a little like bonsai. Go ahead.
Yeah, I remember reading that when the first European settlers came, they were supposed to maintain the road allowance on both sides of their property, but a lot of them were notorious for not doing that. So they had a hard time traveling. So it sounds like the Indigenous people kept better care. Oh, another question. I have not encountered any evidence of intentional burning. Oh, I know what that means, Rick Henderson. I have not encountered any evidence of intentional burning, but I won't speak for Henry.
Okay, thanks, Rick.
Anyway, that's it for questions for now. Thanks for everyone that's asked questions. We can.
All right. So that brings us to the next slide, which gets us to our vision. So the vision is to change the narrative of Ottawa and Canada, and maybe more ambitiously the world, to get us beneath the concrete and to decolonize and to learn from the Indigenous people and the Algonquin Anishinaabe here in particularly as how to be effectively close to nature rather than disastrously as we have been. And so that is, if you like, part of the message of Kichi Sibi Trails, which is the name of the group that we have created in order to revitalize these trails. And so how do we do that? So there's public education, how do we do that, and doing youth trail experiential learning. And what does revitalization mean? Can we do it with a full trail? In some cases, yes, and in other cases, no. Do we need to do landscaping? Maybe we do. Do we need to do signage? Signage is something that we are planning for, although we know that we're in an increasingly digital age, and therefore planting a stick in the ground and saying this is the route is less and less necessary as we become more and more virtual. And what is that trail look like? Is it for canoes? Is it for bikes? Is it for e-scooters? In some cases, all of the above. In some cases, just one or the other. But very often, it'll be for hiking. And so another aspect is well, all right, the research. How do we know? Is what we were talking about earlier, and that requires mapping. We might get to gaming. We're working with Carleton University to create a digital atlas, and moving slowly towards applications like Driftscape or All Trails or the digital museum. And then we may, if we're lucky, be relevant to youth and get into virtual reality, but we're a good ways from that. So if we move to the next slide, you'll get some idea what we're talking about in the medium term. So this is a Driftscape application for Toronto, and it describes the Toronto carrying place along the Humber River. And since this particular item was identified, there's been more art along this route, which is not described. But anyway, this is to give you an idea about, well, all right, what would a useful form of a trails application look like. So it would give you the location, it might give you an image of the different plaques that are identified, and bits of information on how you can hook up to that. So next slide, please. And I mentioned before the digital museum. This has been pioneered by the Museum of History, and their approach is to go to each community, or very often, whether it's settler or Indigenous, and they have, they describe their community and its connection there, and I could see how that might work for Pikwakanagan First, for example. So next slide, please. All right, so where are we now with Kichi Sibi Trails? We have got to the aforementioned Chief Penezi portage at Rockcliffe. We chose that talking to one of our Algonquin Métis friends, and he said, well, his aunt said, well, we should be doing something that's Algonquin. So what did we know about that portage? We knew that it was the hunting grounds of Chief Penezi, one of two in this lower part of the river. And so we then, with the encouragement of the Minister of Infrastructure, Catherine McKenna, applied for a grant. And that grant is about to be coming along to be announced. So it hasn't happened yet, so we can't talk about this anymore, where exactly it's coming from. And we're going to be getting a winter term Carleton intern. With that, we're spending 15,000 of that for 50,000 on a website with Carleton Geography. And we're having 2 Algonquin artists for $15,000 to be doing a ceramic mural at Stanley Park Field House. And that's Doreen Stevens from Pikwakanagan First, and Simon Barak-Coupé is doing the logo and trail marker. A very famous Algonquin artist, and little did I know that he was working with the city of Ottawa to be developing wayfinding markers. So there will be a lot of Silent Rock Coupe markers all over the place in the coming years. And you can go to any of the LRT stations and you will find these wayfinding markers, by the way. And so we will open the portage in June 2022, have a Chief Penesi week. We are hoping Chief Jocko, Chief Jocko has offered to ask the Governor General to attend the opening, and that's just for starters. So, and we've had discussions with Chief Jocko and Mercedes last week, and as he mentioned, thinking of a statue of Chief Penesi, and amongst other things. Anyway, so that just gives you some idea. Other things that we're going to be doing is more research, because every time you do this, you choose to do a portage, you need to do the work to see what you can find with it. And that research means book research, map research, it means walking the trails, it means trying to work with the different partners involved. Jim Stone has done sterling work in doing some of the trail mapping and also the evaluation of the different trails locations. So, for example, with Chief Penesi Portage, we thought that the historical portage was much shorter than it was turned out to be the case. And so the on the ground work was, once we realized that the rapids were too ferocious near the Rideau Falls, we had to back it up and we had to do the work. And Max Finkelstein did the work. He did the paddling in his canoe and with a 10-foot aluminum pole to see, well, where would the portage have been, and he determined that it was near the St. Patrick Beechwood Bridge. Anyway, so that's what it's actually like. I note that the city of Ottawa is in the process of changing its sign on Indigenous commemoration, and I see Randy Boswell is going to be talking about that next month with the HSO, so that will be interesting, and they're in the process of developing their own reconciliation action plan. We've been having excellent discussions with Pikwakanagan. The ones with Kichi Sibi are ongoing, starting to get somewhere, but they're still ongoing. And hopefully, once Kichi Sibi is on board, we'll be able to get the tribal council also on board. So next slide, please. All right. Sorry, looks like I've done some repetition here. So forgive me on that. So where are we? So we've got the first one, the Chief Penesi Portage, and thanks to talking with Mervyn and Chief Jocko, we have other things to do over the following years. So, and then where do we go next? Do we go to the upper portage at Deschênes Rapids, or do we go to the Hull and Little Chaudière portages, which definitely need work and commemoration, and the ones that at Hull in particular, they're in the process of being transformed. There's a the summer portage is in the course of being reworked by ZB with the approval of the NCC, but unfortunately it doesn't have any portage features that I could actually discern. So there's work there. And then there is the line, the trail between Mooney's Bay to Lemieux Island. There was an Onagam street there, and Onagam means portage. And so there's that one to commemorate. And there will be an Indigenous Youth Center also at 1010 Somerset West. And I'm hoping that we can encourage Indigenous Algonquin canoe makers to work with the youth in that new center, and that would work nicely with that portage route between Dow's Lake and Lemieux. And then, of course, there was what started it off in the first place, the Sherwood Drive to Remick Rapids trail. That coincides with the development of the new Ottawa Civic Hospital. So there is a certain time of the essence in dealing with that. So next slide, please. So what we've learned from the Chief Benesi portage, we've realized that this is really the right moment. I've not been involved in many different initiatives of one kind or another. I have never seen so much enthusiasm by people in general, by different levels of government, whether they're settlers, whether they're Algonquin. It is really remarkable. It's really remarkable. And frankly, it's thrilling to be engaged in this when there seems to be so much interest. And I know that this would not have been the case 5 or 6 years ago. So we are in a moment in time where the stars have aligned, to use another metaphor. And another part is developing partnership with the Algonquin First Nations is vital. The federal government and city are key elements. In other words, for the federal and city government, if we can't work through from along the NCC where they have control, it becomes really hard to do a portage, for example, because the NCC have control along the river banks. The city governments have control in interior, so those pieces are vital, and of course you have to work with the Algonquin, which is fantastic. Again, something which did not used to be the case, right? It was just something to be brushed off. Something else we've learned is that you have to have stories to tell all along the trail. So, and this is perhaps some of my own naivete, I guess, but you have to be able to say something as you're walking, virtually or electronically or otherwise. And those stories are written still in the plants, in the species that are there. The trails still speak now through the silver birch, they speak through the shagbark hickory, they speak through every little bush and plant that is medicine. And so the other aspects is that there are different trails now. So there's the trail which is historical, which you can define and do research and figure out, but that doesn't mean that that is the trail that you should use for the purposes of a revitalized trail. And so in the case of Chief Benesi portage, we know that the historical one had to avoid the rapids. Well, they put a dam at the end of Chaudière Falls, and so you can now, if you're in a canoe, you only have to walk 600 meters between the Ottawa and the Rideau, whereas previously you have to work, well, now 2.7 kilometers. And another thing you learn is that research changes the paths, and ground truthing changes your paths. And you have to do both in order to really have a meaningful understanding of what the route was like, and that those routes change with time, and they change with the seasons. The rivers move, the rapids wear through the rock, etc. And another part is that telling the stories of Algonquin genealogy is vital, because that makes the connection between these trails and the people whose trails they are. And so and that's the key link. Now, getting communities, whether they're settler or Algonquin, can be easy. Working with Pikwakanagan has been amazingly easy. Working with some settler communities in the area, some parts of it's really easy, some of it's hard, you know. Next slide. Thank you. So we've been working very solidly with Pikwakanagan, as I've mentioned, and we're still moving on. We're now moving on to Kichi Sibi and the Tribal Council. We've certainly have very solid partnership with the City of Ottawa, and now we're working on the NCC. We have not worked. We've worked with folks who are Métis Algonquin or Métis of one kind or another, but we've not worked with the Métis as such, and we have not developed any urban Indigenous partnership. But that's obviously going to be a key element of working in Ottawa Gatineau, because there is a 40,000 person urban Indigenous community. We're starting to work with the schools, nibbling at that, but of course COVID makes that very difficult. We're starting to develop different teams and niches and the like. The other part is that we have to roll out the portage project, and we have to finish that by the end of June. Beyond that, do we go further? Do we do a national trail network? Do we work with Le Grand Portage, whose 5-year project is to go across the country? Do we go internationally? What do we do? What's next? So we don't quite know where this is all leading us to, but it's obvious that there's at least 20 years of work to really do some mapping and commemoration. And the vision is to do this for 7 generations. 100 years ago, Judge Latchford spent time and effort to commemorate the whole portages, but those were washed away into the midst of time. And so there's very little of Judge Latchford's work 100 years ago that is still apparent. And so part of the job for us is to make sure that that history goes into, lasts for 7 generations, and work its part through repeated activities together, working with the Algonquin, working with local settler groups, canoeing, doing anything that makes it possible to make that knowledge sticky again and stay in the hearts of the people. So with that, next slide, please. Thank you. So questions, go ahead.
Yeah, we've got lots of questions, though I think you've answered a lot of them since they've been asked, but here's one. Is there a website for the trail group? I think you mentioned.
Not yet, no. That's what we're working on with the Carleton Geography, but not yet. We have 2 Facebook pages, one for Chief Pinesi Portage at Rockcliffe and another for Kichi Sibi Trails.
Yeah, you mentioned you had some money earmarked for websites, so that's good. Again, someone with a suggestion here about signage that would include QR codes. Has that been considered?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. That's something that we want to consider, we want to do, not consider, at different locations, say when we find a plant or other, or that sort of thing. Go ahead.
Although my thinking on that one, if I can just add a point, yeah, QR codes are great because they're 24/7. They're always there whenever you show up with a sign. But I think one possible option would be walking tours sometime in the future, so that people show up and people like you, I'm just suggesting, Peter, might be able to lead people on portions of the trail and tell the story.
We've done a virtual Jane's Walk. We were going to do a physical one, and we did a virtual one. So there is a virtual Jane's Walk available, and my expectation is that there will be physical Jane's Walks with other human beings in the near future, and I'm hoping by June that that's the case. And I would imagine that as a result of the June grand opening, there will be a series of them, and we've had discussion with different folks from the Indigenous communities about doing medicine paddles and tours to imagine life without a cell phone and the like.
Okay, that's good news. Then hopefully COVID will help. That will clear up so we can get some walking tours going. Some suggestions on some routes here. Will any of the trail marking work be extended up through the valley communities towards the region of the Pikwakanagan? And how would those move forward with local government?
Well, at this point, what we have been thinking in terms of can we bring Pikwakanagan folks and Kichi Sibi folks down on an annual event coming down from those two communities, and that therefore would bring about commemoration along the portages at those locations. Now, I can imagine that, say, working with Pembroke community, there would be opportunities there, and we've had some discussion about Morrison Island as well, and I don't know if Merv wants to chime in on that particular case, but we have not really got too far into that at this point.
Yeah, Peter, I was just trying to charge up my laptop because the battery is dying, but there was a particular question you want me to chime in on? Can you just make...
Morrison Island, when we were talking to you, you were talking about the grave and that experience.
Oh, yes, yes. In 2000, the Pikwakanagan Powell Committee had looked to seek a theme for our powwow that year, and what we did is we had asked Kirby Whiteduck, who was a scholar, if he could prepare something for us in relations to Chief Tezawat, who shared a document with you some time back. But he wrote an article about Chief Tezawat meeting Champlain in 1603, and Champlain making his way up to the home of Tezawat, which was Tezawat Island. Well, Morrison Island was initially called Tezawat Island. Morrison Island is near present-day Pembroke, and so Champlain made his way there in his second voyage, I guess, to the area in 1613, I think. And so, with the theme on Morrison Island, Kirby did write a 6-pager, and then he summarized it in 2 lines for a powwow, so that it was an educational document that really speaks to who we are as Algonquin people in the Ottawa Valley, and how we were connected with all the Anishinaabe people. And Champlain did write about that in his journals, and that's where Kirby got a story. But also it was verified by other scholars as well. one was Joanne McCann McGill, who wrote about or is involved in the restoration of Wazo Rock, and that was another story we did in 2001 for the powwow. And so it speaks to Morrison Island and the Kichi Sibi Algonquin, Kichi Sibi Algonquins that lived there, resided there prior to the European arrival, and so there were archaeological digs there. I forget who the persons were, but there was an archaeological report done there, which they found well over 1,000 pieces of artifacts that are housed in the Museum of History, and also they also found the bones, remains of those ancestors, and removed them. And so back then, Wendy was on council. She wasn't chief then, but her and I and one of the other members of council, Ron Bernard, we ventured off to the Museum of History to see those remains that were removed. But the archaeological report led us right to the site of Morrison Island, where those ancestor remains and artifacts were removed. And so we brought medicine people and spiritual people with us in 2000 to honor Chief Deswat and the Kichi Sibi Anishinaabe warriors. And so we did it in a traditional way. We had an elder there, we made our fire, we did our prayers, we did our ceremony with the traditional drum. And it was one of the most spirit-moving, I would say spirit-moving endeavors that I ever got involved in, because it was just like Chief Deswat and the Algonquin Anishinaabe warriors were not honored. Their bodies and their spirits were removed at that time. And so I think we did honor by recognizing them. And so we were able to walk away feeling that something was done properly to heal that island. But the owner was not so happy about it, because with the land claim going on and around that time, everybody was panicking, thinking that, well, the Algonquins are now reclaiming all their lands, and so therefore there was a sign there that said Teswat's Island, and he did say he removed it for fear that the Algonquins would reclaim their lands, and it was his. He had deed, and he spoke. The owner of the land spoke quite eloquently about Chief Deswat. He knew a lot of story about him. We knew where his remains were taken to, like in Blue Mountain, but he wouldn't be very specific. But we learned lots from that. So I'd share that, Peter.
Thank you. I mean, we know that the Kichi Sibi were the largest group amongst the Algonquin that we've heard of anyway, so it makes a whole lot of sense that around that area that there should therefore be considerable commemoration, and Merv has brought to life that reality just now, and thank you for doing that. Do you want to take it away at this point as far as more questions?
Just a couple more questions here. First, I want to thank one of our board members, Kathy, for posting the Facebook pages for the Kichi Sibi Trail and the Chief Panesi Trail. So anyone, if they want to get on to chat, they can link to those two Facebook groups and get more information. Here's one from someone, Shirley Munkos, who asked, who do I contact if I have knowledge of an old trail that is in this region?
You can contact me at 613-852-4527 if you'd like. I've sent a message to Shirley just to make sure she's aware of that, but or yeah, that's probably the best. I would say, unless you'd also like to be contacted, Merv, or how it depends on how you'd like to do that, or Barb.
I was just going to suggest, if they didn't get the number, you can certainly leave your emails with HSO, and if Shirley wants to contact us through our website, we can.
Dr. Peter Stockdale,
and again, if this is going to be recorded for later, you can get the phone number that way.
Yeah,
That's
if anybody
information. Go ahead, Mark.
if anybody wants to reach me I'd gladly accept their emails. You have my email, councillor.merv@pikwakanagan.ca. And I'd gladly reply and share a lot of information on what we spoke about this evening. And,
Can they get that email through the Pikwakanagan website?
It would be on our Algonquins at Pikwakanagan First Nation's website as well.
Okay, yeah, that's probably the easiest way to get people. They can just go to the website, just click on. And one last question here someone has: in preventing cultural appropriation of this heritage, will the Algonquin nations be fully integrated in partnership regarding the administration of the sites and the trails? How much in there?
We have to work out on this. I mean, there's definitely going to be a research agreement. Definitely, we want as much Algonquin partnership as they can bear.
Maybe I could speak a little bit to that, Peter, because
please.
I do have some experience. I did speak earlier, but I don't think it was recorded. But we've been involved in quite extensive partnerships with government agencies, and one more recently was with Public Service Procurement Canada, who was formerly Public Works Government Services, and also they wrote a proposal for funding to Indigenous Services Canada under SPI, special initiative. And we got funding for that to create a new Indigenous archaeological field school. So each community, we were bringing together Kichi Sibi and Algonquins of Pikwakanagan in this new project. And so it also required collaboration with several other agencies, in particular the Museum of History. And I see Pierre Desroches is on the call, so he's I speak honorably about his involvement from the museum. He did a great job. He can testify to that. So I see Robin Etherington on there from Bytown Museums. We've had some collaboration, but not on the archaeology stuff, but we spoke about it in her presentations. But the other partners we had was NCC, or the National Capital Commission, with their lead archaeologist that was loaned to us as advisory was Ian Badgley. So we had an agreement there what his involvement will be. And then we also had the Algonquin College. We brought them in to help us with the laboratory work. So we did all our archaeological work along the Rideau River by Carleton University and south side there. And so we ran that project over just this past summer. But it took a lot of partnership and nation building. Like the Algonquin Nation has been, as you know, fractured, and so we're rebuilding the nation. And I think this type of a project, Peter, would help that, that bringing us back together, because we're still missing the Algonquin Nation Tribal Council, because they're in terms of their affiliation, there's only 7 First Nations in Quebec that affiliated with that particular tribal council. So the other 10 First Nations are affiliated with another tribal council. They're called the Algonquin Nation Secretariat Programs and Services, and that brings all those 10 First Nations from Quebec to the table, and it brings Pikwakanagan to the table, so 11 of us. But we've already started the partnership on a number of projects in Ottawa, which I sit on, and there's a Nepean Point project, there's the Alexandria Bridge, there's the Le Breton's project, there's a number of them, right? And they all require agreements, probably memorandums of understandings for starters, just so we frame it out, what it is, what we're doing. Secondly, we have specific agreements on money, funding, because nobody works for free, right?
No.
Yeah, our vehicles don't run on air, right? So we got to get to these sites, get to these out to these meetings, and especially if you want to unite the descendants of Chief Panesse, there's thousands. You know, what you come upon is thousands, not just one or two like myself. There's lots of them. It's so huge that it'll involve like 2,000 to 3,000 maybe. And I'm just throwing it out there. But how many other descendants are there in Kichi Sibi? If you look at the waterways, the connections, you know, Chief Panesse and the Algonquins, they just didn't sit in one area. You know, they moved around, moved about the land. And so with his story, he moved about the Ottawa and the Rideaus, and he made his way over to the Madawaska River. And there, voila, my grandfather's born, right? Up in that area. From then, my mother and me. So you see, that's like 7 generations, I think. How far back? What do we do for the next 7 generations going forward? I'm trying to give you a visual, right? As to how we move forward on that side. But the partnership is a big endeavor. And it's not done easy because everybody has their own thoughts about what the MOU should be about. Everybody's got their own idea, especially in government. They have to protect their own interests, right? Media, communications, the work of the advisory, and so on, and the involvement of the schools, you know. So I would just share that for now, just to tell you how complex it is. And we pulled it off just recently, successfully.
I think one, as far as Kichi Sibi Trails itself as a group is concerned, working with Carleton Geography in the development of the atlas is helpful, not just in knowing how to do it, but also because they've worked with the Inuit in multiple projects, and they've worked with the Maya also, and so they have a natural the experience and also the intention to encourage settler at this point dominated groups like Kichi Sibi Trails to really push what is it that the Algonquin want, that they say that they want, and also what things might the Algonquin want also. And so I think that's really been helpful, and I think it will continue to keep us honest. And so I'm grateful for that. Any other questions?
No, that catches up for, one just came in. That catches up for questions, but I do want to thank Christine Nadeau for posting the website of the Algonquins of the Pikwakanagan, so that if you need to get in touch with Barb or Merv, you can do it by clicking on that. That's in the chat box. So, and then some comments to read. So thanks a lot. I'm going to pass things back over to Ben. If you want to wrap things up for us, Ben.
Absolutely. Miigwech. We've had 3 very eloquent, very passionate presenters tonight, and I think it's been an eye-opener for so many of us. And I have a feeling that a lot of people do have more questions. And as you mentioned, Richard, if they would just like to send them to us at the HSO, if they're not sure of email addresses or contacts, send us, go to our website, email us, we'll pass your questions on for sure if you want to create some new connections. It's been an absolutely fantastic evening, wonderful presentations. It's such important information for all of us to know. Again, our next presentation, our last presentation of the year will be on November the 24th with Randy Boswell. So thank you to everyone, Miigwech, for joining us tonight. And thank you so much to our presenters.
Very good. Thank you.
You're very welcome. I enjoyed myself tonight. Thank you.
Excellent.
Same here. I really have enjoyed the night. I'm glad to see it was really well attended. Over 106 people, I think, and lots of chatting going on. 41 chats, and I'm looking forward to actually to a follow-up series. So
absolutely, Merv. I have exactly. I know what we're going to do. I'll be contacting you and hounding you. We'll be setting up a follow-up.
Okay, I look forward to it, there, Ben.
Okay.
Thank you, Ben. Really appreciate
Thank
it.
you, everybody.
And great job, Jen. I will send you more photos and slides.
My pleasure. I think I mostly caught up with you, wonderful speaker. So that was good.
Thank you, Jen. Sorry to push you around different.
All good. Thanks.
Mama P.
It was hard to ask questions and change slides, though, I must admit.
Mhm.
You got a
Josh,
few.